Hello everyone, the Instant Camera Guy here, and welcome to an episode where I'm going to talk about a very interesting camera. Now, Polaroid is a very interesting company because not only do they have many novel products that are interesting and unique to use, but the history of the company itself, particularly their founder, Dr. Edwin Land, is just genuinely interesting in and of itself. Now, on this channel, I've already spoken at quite great lengths about the SX70 and how it was famously over budget in terms of research and development, with Polaroid spending the equivalent of around $1 billion in research and development, resulting in the camera basically being released half-baked, which required about 10 years worth of revisions to constantly improve the design flaws that the original SX70 came out with. But one subject that doesn't get brought up very often is the fiasco that was Polavision. See, around the late 1970s, Polaroid effectively tried to introduce an instantaneous movie format known as Polavision. You can think about Polavision kind of like instantaneous Super 8 film. Ultimately, the product was released, but it performed very poorly, was very expensive, and was just in general a complete and utter commercial disaster. And the Polavision fiasco ultimately resulted in Dr. Edwin Land's resignation from the company in 1982. Now, I'm not so sure that he truly resigned from the company as much as it was a "you can't fire me, I quit" type of deal, but regardless, he was left or was booted out. And after 1982, a really interesting era of Polaroid cameras basically appeared. And this era of Polaroid cameras I like to refer to as the Malibu Stacy with a new hat era, because it seems that Polaroid decided to take a back seat to innovating, although there are exceptions to that, for example with the Polaroid Spectra series of cameras, which were quite novel and unique, although ultimately pretty much just based on the Polaroid 600 in terms of film emulsion, although it was a slightly wider format and the cameras themselves had more features. But Polaroid really sort of stopped innovating and began to play it very, very safe. And one of the things that sort of happened during this period of time is Polaroid changed sort of marketing tactics and continued to pretty much re-release the same camera over and over and over and over again, but for apparently different use cases, despite the camera being, for the better part, exactly the same. Examples I've made of this before is the Polaroid Job Pro, which is basically just a Polaroid 600. Now, admittedly, it does have extra little features like a spot on the strap where you can put a Sharpie, which I guess is a neat innovation. But other than a few very small changes, it is basically just a regular Polaroid 600 that is painted yellow and marketed towards construction. And this really isn't the only example of this. Polaroid also had the Business Edition, which was basically the same as the Job Pro, but black. They had a bright orange emergency worker, EMS version for like paramedics and emergency services. They also marketed cameras towards kids, such as the Cool Cam series, which were sort of marketed towards the tween and teenage market. If you're ever curious, by the way, to find out whether or not Polaroid intended to market their cameras towards children, all you need to do is look for the extra warning labels. So in the door, it'll basically say, "Caution, if the developing paste gets on your skin, wipe it off immediately." And additionally, hidden right under the flash, it basically says, "Do not take apart the flash to avoid the risk of electric shock." And I guess that's because they figured children will be children and love taking things apart. And you'll also find in the cameras marketed towards kids that they put extra like blobs of goo on the flash circuitry to prevent you being shocked on the parts most likely to cause electric shock. But yeah, Polaroid did this over and over again. I have another super colorful example here called the Esprit, or the Supercolor 635. This one is in its box I was the first person to open it. I broke the seal just to confirm that it works. That's why the strap is all unraveled. But otherwise, this camera has never been used. And Polaroid did this over and over again. In fact, they even re-released the same exact camera under different names depending on what market they were selling the camera in. So for example, the autofocus series of these cameras was known across the world as the 660 AF, the 670 AF, the 770 AF, the Polaroid Sun autofocus, I believe was another example. The standard Sun 600 was known as the Spirit, the Sun 600, the QS, I think, was another one. Anyway, you get the point that I'm trying to make here. Polaroid seemingly, lost without their revolutionary visionary leader, started basically just trying to sell cameras by changing the color of them and adding and subtracting a few features here and there in order to push these cameras towards specific market demographics. Now, one of the most interesting versions of Polaroid, one of the most interesting examples, I think, of Polaroid doing this is a camera called the Photomagic. Now, I don't actually possess one of those. I used to own one many, many years ago, but I'm just going to show you guys a photo of what they look like. It is basically just a Polaroid 600, but with a big plastic housing built over the front of the camera. Internally, it is just a standard Sun 600 LMS. All the labels and things are blank. If you do take that housing apart, you'll note that all the labels and stuff underneath for the flash are just sort of generic and blank. But yeah, it is basically just a Polaroid 600 with a cage around it. Now, the purpose of the cage at the front of the camera, the purpose of that outer housing, was basically to produce a type of vignette on the photograph. See, only the very, very center part of the photo, which I'll illustrate here, would actually turn out. And the rest of the photograph would end up being completely washed out. And I believe that that's because inside the actual housing is basically like a sort of prism that just kind of reflects light and turns it into a white mush when you use the flash. And basically what it means is that only the very center portion of your photograph is ever visible at any one time. And that is because you are then intended to use the particular image that you get with a special device. This little guy over here, which might be one of the most interesting Polaroid accessories ever made. Basically what this thing does, you insert your film like so, you close it, you spin the little wheel, and what it does is cut your Polaroid photo into a perfect 3-inch circle. Now, the diffused white part of the vignette would be used in combination with some kind of a filter which would have a phrase on it. You know, it would say something like, "Happy birthday," or, you know, something like that, right? Basically, this camera was designed for use at events with a secondary, I guess with a primary function to put extra words onto an image, but with a secondary function to then turn these particular circular images into badges, or buttons, as some people call them. And basically, you would basically buy a 3-inch button making kit, which would have a clear cover for the top, and it would have a back, and there would be a little safety pin, and then you could pin your circular Polaroid photo to, you know, I guess, whoever wanted to wear a Polaroid photo on their chest. It's just a really interesting idea. The thing that I think is super interesting about it is, other than it saying text around the image, I think that there would be no reason that Polaroid couldn't have just sold this particular part of the accessory on its own. I'm not sure that Polaroid ever did. As far as I could tell, these were only ever available with the Polaroid Photomagic system kit. basically. I believe they were only sold with the camera. It wasn't something that you could go and purchase on its own. Maybe it was, but I haven't at least found any evidence of that. But what it does mean is that if you choose not to use it with its matching camera, you do get full frame coverage on the photos that you do cut out. So you basically end up with 3-inch circular Polaroid images, which I think is quite novel and possibly a bit more useful than having that text around the sides. But yeah, definitely one of Polaroid's most interesting cameras to have ever come out of this period of time. Like I said before, it really was a period in which Polaroid were trying to recover very much financially from previous disasters, and they were just sort of throwing ideas at the wall and figuring out what would stick. And many of those ideas involved recycling the same camera, but adding or subtracting little bits and pieces to make it useful for a certain market case. I don't believe that there's any reason that they couldn't have sold the outer housing on the Photomagic basically separately, because as far as I recall from when I used to own one, it was just a bog standard Polaroid 600 inside. There was nothing unique about it at all. And I remember that because I tried to sell it after I purchased it and realized, oh, well, this is pretty much a one-trick pony and doesn't really do much that's interesting. I wanted to sell my Polaroid Photomagic and had absolutely no biters because it was such a niche piece of kit. So I ended up actually taking the housing off, swapping a few of the little badges, and just converting it back into a standard Polaroid 600, where it then sold instantly and I was able to recoup my money. But yeah, an interesting piece of history, and yeah, one that I think was worth talking about. I hope you learned something interesting from today's video. Just another shorter one while I'm in the middle of Christmas repairs. If you enjoy this kind of content, then please feel free to support the channel any way you can. The best way to do that, of course, is by sending me a Polaroid camera to fix and repair. But you can also feel free to leave a donation with the links below, or simply a like and subscribe goes a long way in terms of keeping my lights on. I'll see you guys in the next video. You've been a wonderful audience, and have a wonderful day.